gentlemen, we welcome you back at BOB Bank of Baroda Charbagh, and in this lovely session that's going to follow, it's Vir Sanghvi in conversation with Mandira Nayar. India's leading food writer, a celebrated television personality, Vir Sanghvi, takes us through his sharp-eyed observations on our changing society and his illustrious career in television media, political journalism, and food writing. He recently launched Culinary Culture, an independent rating organization and a movement to recognize India's best chefs and street food vendors, along with organizing global culinary exchanges and encompass all aspects of food space in India. In conversation with journalist Mandira Nayar, Sanghvi discusses his diverse interests and views on media, culture, food, and changing social and political dynamics of India. We're very lucky to have him here. I invite him upon stage, Mr. Vir Sanghvi and Mandira Nayar. Give them a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. So Vir on the first chair. This one. Thank you. Vir Sanghvi became editor of Bombay magazine at the age of 22, making him the youngest editor in the country. He went on to edit Imprint and Sunday, then India's largest selling weekly magazines. He has been both editor and editorial director at the Hindustan Times and continues as a columnist and an advisor. His television career includes award-winning shows on the Star TV network, NDTV, and CNN Television, TV18. He also has significant parallel career as India's leading food and travel writer. Mandira Nayar is a journalist with 2 decades of reporting experience. She writes on books, foreign affairs, culture, and is currently the deputy chief at The Week. A Charles Walsh scholar, Nayar has previously worked with The Hindu and The Telegraph. So it's over to you, Mandira and Vir. Thank you.
Hello, am I audible? Okay, yeah, perfect. Good afternoon, and welcome to this incredibly funny, insightful book, A Rude Life. It's sort of a ringside view of, and as they've said, of India, journalism, and everything in between. It lives up to both the name Rude as well as Life, which of course Vir Sanghvi is known for. But I wanted to actually ask you, you started off by saying, he said that you were the youngest editor. And, I've been a journalist for about 20 years. You started off when you were 22. You started off and you became an editor when you were 22. I became
an editor when I was 22, but I started before that.
And at one point of time of the book, you're sort of wooed by Obik Sarkar on one side, Obik Babu, this thing, and on the other side by the Jains, right? And they're both fighting over you to about a
little over dramatic.
Oh, come on, they both want you to get into a into the house, right?
Yeah.
They both want to lend you this house, and I just wanted to ask you, where is this world of journalism right now? Because if you look at it, most of us start out, we don't get forth this thing, and can you talk a little bit about that, about being?
Yeah. I think, I hate saying this, but it's true. Not just in India, but I think in much of the world, but especially in India, journalism is dying. There are many reasons for this. The obvious one, of course, is other media, including the internet. Then the fact that newspapers are not making very much money any longer. Also, I don't know how many of you understand this, but the Indian newspaper model is different from, say, the British or the American model. In Britain or America, you buy a newspaper and part of the cost of production is subsidized by advertising. In India, everything is done by advertisers. They give the newspaper away for virtually nothing. and they depend on advertisers, which is why India claims to have such widely circulated newspapers. I mean, you would have widely circulated newspapers anywhere in the world if you handed them out virtually for free. But what this means is that advertisers matter much more than the journalists. They matter much more than the content. And when advertisers move away, as they have done to newer media, journalism is in trouble.
But when you started out actually,
Yeah.
and you sort of were a pioneering journalist in many ways in terms of, in a sense you saw, you were, you started the first food column, let's say.
Yeah.
You also start, you're at television at the time before it really explodes, right? This thing, so did content, I mean, you talk about great editors, you talk about the Blitz, you talk about, you talk about Bombay, where you're editing this magazine, and you are really looking at content and creating this.
Yeah.
Was content king at any point of time, or do you think, we sort of,
No, I think content was king. I mean, it's not a phrase we use now, but absolutely what determined whether a newspaper succeeded, whether a magazine succeeded, whether a television show succeeded was the content. It's not like today where I think content is secondary.
okay. So I also now wanted to talk to you really about all the things that all the people you kind of meet. And you've done this whole, this thing of this vast array of people, from Haji Mastan to George Harrison, right? To Dom Moraes. You have this incredible story about Salman Rushdie, Dom Moraes, and midnight.
It was a lunch, actually.
Was it a lunch?
It was a lunch,
Okay.
which is what made it worse. Yeah.
Yes, can you please tell us, can you talk about this?
It's probably not so nice to begin with a not very nice anecdote about somebody, but Salman Rushdie came to India after the publication of Midnight's Children. He was lionized and got a great welcome. He got a call from Dom Moraes. I don't know how many of you remember him. He was, within his generation, a very well-known poet and writer. And he, like many poets and writers, liked to drink.
And lots of journalists too.
As many of us do. And Salman said to him, which is probably the wrong thing to say to Dom, would you like to come over for a drink? And so Dom said yes, and they met in the Taj, and this was pre-lunch, and Dom had a drink, and Salman had a drink, and then Dom had another drink, and then Dom had another drink. At the end of it, when they were sort of all pissed as newts almost, though Salman claims he was relatively sober, Dom said to him, do you want to come home for lunch? I live nearby. So Salman said yes. So they went home for lunch. Dom disappeared into the kitchen, we think, or Salman thinks. And then he heard the sound of shouting and quarreling from inside, and a very querulous woman's voice saying, I am not going to make any lunch for him. You effing invited him. You effing feed him. So at this stage, I imagine Salman should have left, but he stayed. And then there was sounds of a crash, and nothing happened. And then after about 10 minutes, the servant came to Salman and said, very sorry sir, saab to behosh ho gaye. So apparently Dom had collapsed inside, but he said, the servant said kindly, that they'd made fried fish for Dom's lunch. Would Salman like to have it? And
Salman did.
Salman did. He stayed on with his man collapsing inside, his wife shouting, ate the fried fish and went back. So I don't know who the story reflects better on, but that's what happened.
Well, I would have fried fish too. But I think it's also, what you really provided, I think, is that, of a completely different time, access to journalism, the access journalists got. You got access to Bal Thackeray. You talk about him. You say you were possibly someone who has been able to deal with Amitabh Bachchan's silences the best way. So can you really talk about the kind of access that you got? Can you talk about
Sure.
Yeah,
it was a more innocent era in the sense that if you wanted to meet Amitabh Bachchan now, you couldn't. If you wanted to meet any movie star now, you'd have to go through PR companies. They would only agree to give you an interview when the star had a movie to promote, and it would be 1 out of 15 interviews on the same day, and he or she would say the same things. It's a global pattern, so I'm not saying it's true to India. Politicians, however, it's different. I think until this government was elected, politicians were quite happy engaging with journalists, asking what was going on, talking to them. This government, I think, hates journalists. There's no question of talking to journalists unless you're willing to sort of you conduct all interviews in the kneeling position and submit your questions well in advance, you won't get interviews. It's a fact of life. It's something we've learned to live with. This government claims, and perhaps they're right, that journalism no longer matters. They think journalism doesn't matter. They have social media. What can one interview get me that 200 tweets from the IT cell cannot? So as a consequence, journalists have never been as irrelevant in the national political space as we are now.
But this wasn't so. I mean, in the sense you talk about television at one point of time, and I wanted to ask you whether at some point of time is it because if, you know, there's that very famous song, Video Killed the Radio Star, right?
Yeah.
Right? But do you think social media killed both television journalists as well as print journalists? You know, you talk about a time when a prime minister drives to Noida to do an interview.
Not an interview, to appear on a panel. Not even an interview.
Yes. And you know, if you watch this show on Netflix where it's this, I'm sorry, she's you know, about this woman who's the prime minister, I think, of Denmark, I think.
Borgen,
yes, right?
Yes, yeah.
And you look at it and you say, my God, is that even possible? It was possible at some point.
It was. I mean, I think it was possible till this government was elected. Until the very end, when he turned very silent and wouldn't meet anybody, Manmohan Singh, if you were a journalist and editor and you wanted to go and see him on an off-the-record basis, he would invite you, he would chat to you, he would try and explain what he was saying or what he was doing. And this is even before television, or even after television really took over. People felt, perhaps rightly or wrongly, that journalism still set the agenda and they could talk to people. I mean, it could be because the Congress never understood social media, which was its undoing, and the BJP had social media. But until the Congress was defeated and Mr. Modi was elected, journalists had an enviable level of access. You could pretty much call up anybody, go and see them if you were like a senior columnist or a well-known editor or anyone.
Yeah, so access has, of course, been this thing. But, okay, so now can you tell me about the kind of access you got and all the backup room, this thing?
I don't actually get that much access. You make it sound much more glamorous than it really was.
I think, you know, as a journalist, one of the things, and you kind of learn very early on, is rejection, okay?
Yeah.
So you call up everybody and you sort of, most people don't want to see you. There are very few people who really want to see you, at least as journalists. I suppose it's different when you become editors, but certainly as a journalist, when you start out, you're sort of only facing rejection. But, you know, you have this really wonderful story about Haji Mastan, and I would like you to tell that, and I then would like you to tell the story about Bal Thackeray, because I think it's also important to talk about the kind of Bombay that existed. Yeah.
First of all, we were discussing this. How many of you heard of Haji Mastan?
See, the whole audience, see?
I mentioned this because my son read my book and he skipped all the chapters about this Mastan character, etc., who I'd never heard of. So I just wanted to check. Haji Mastan was, in his time, the biggest smuggler of the day. We're talking about a period when smuggling was really big. He was lionized by the Hindi film media. You may have seen Once Upon a Time in Bombay or Mumbai. The Ajay Devgan character, the hero, is based on Haji Mastan. But most famously, Diwar, starring Amitabh Bachchan, was a fictionalized story of Haji Mastan's life. Haji Mastan, in 1977, after he'd been put in jail and various things, took a vow along with other smugglers in front of Jayaprakash Narayan, saying that they would never do anything illegal, smuggling was terrible, etc., etc. So we were starting this magazine called Bombay, and we thought on the cover we'd put various famous Bombay people of that era, Amitabh Bachchan, Haji Mastan, etc. And
you, of course, didn't tell Haji Mastan that you were going to put him as a former smuggler, right?
That's where it gets complicated, because I said, could we do an interview? And he was more than willing at that stage. I think he just loved being a hero of Diwar and being thought of as this Amitabh Bachchan character. And I went to this place he lived at, which is a bungalow. I don't know how many of you know Bombay, in Sophia College Lane near Breach Candy. Old bungalow. It had a truck outside, a decrepit truck. And the story was that this was the truck in which he'd made his first delivery of gold, and it had a sentimental attachment to him. And I went and interviewed him, and he said, what do you want to talk to me about? And I said, your career as a smuggler. So he said, who says I'm a smuggler? And I said, you said, no. He said, so I said, well, you took a vow in front of Jayaprakash Narayan. He said, what did I say? I said, smuggling is very bad and I will never do it. I will never do it. You should take that vow too.
See?
So we were getting nowhere then. So I said, just give me a quote about Bombay. And he gave a quote. And I said, I need a picture for the cover because we didn't have a photographer with us. And he said, sure. And he vanished inside. Then he stuck his head out again. And he said, do you want a print or you want a transparency? Which threw me completely because outside of journalism, few people realized that you needed transparencies in those days. He came out with 3 transparencies, said a biopic, which is really about my life is being made. This is the name of the director. He'll give you stills. And because I thought he was fascinating, I kept up and I went and saw him every 4 months or so. At that stage, he admitted he was a smuggler. And the stories he told about the underworld, I thought were really fascinating.
So, and but you also, there is, when you go on, then there is an aspect of it where you say that he had, sort of become almost drunk, my word, not yours, about his image. He sort of bought his own image, and then there is, and this person who goes to buy Cameo soap, and then and then he comes back. So essentially, there's this lady who goes to Crawford Market, I think, right?
Rukhsana Sultan, some of you have heard of,
yes. Goes to buy, and she only uses Cameo soap, and she goes to the market to buy it, and she finds that but there are no Cameo soaps. And she comes out, and she's standing outside her car, and she thinks there's a crowd, and she can't understand why there is, and it is because there is about 50 Cameo soaps.
The entire back seat and part of the front seat.
And then there is Haji Mastan saying it is Haji Mastan, right?
Yeah, there's a man in white clothes standing near the car and the people are bowing to him and she looks up and he says, I am Haji Mastan. So he enjoyed that kind of show.
So, I mean, there is this wonderful aspect of Bombay, this sort of almost, where Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children seems kind of makes sense, right? It doesn't always seem like magic realism, it almost is this thing. So it was also a Bombay where you talk about Bal Thackeray, and you said while you didn't necessarily like his politics, you thought he was the most enjoyable person.
Yeah, I mean, I loathed his politics and he knew I loathed his politics, but it was different in that era. If he knew that you hated his politics but thought you were a reasonable chap, he would invite you for dinner, he would talk about his politics, you would tell him how disgusting you thought they were, and he would laugh. He really didn't seem to care. It's all changed now, and he was a politician of the old school. He would see you to your car, and every time as I was getting into my car, he would say in a sort of slightly fascist, creepy way, Jai Maharashtra. And I would say Jai Gujarat because I'm a Gujarati. And he thought this was not on. So the next time he said, can we compromise on Jai Bombay? So that's what we compromised on.
Yes.
Can't imagine that happening now, right? We'll break my legs.
No, I think it also was the fact that you could have political differences but not be defined by them. I think there is that aspect to it. And there is also, and I hate to say this thing, but it isn't a particularly this thing, but can we talk about do you think I'm short?
Do I think?
Yeah,
okay. Dom Moraes, who features again in our story, had written a book called Bombay for Time Life Books, and it was a standard Time Life publication. They used to do all these books on cities, very bad photographs, I thought, and a text that was originally written by Dom, which they threw out because it was all about when I was a boy, I met J.R.D. Tata, etc. And they added stuff written by writers from the Time New York office. And the book came out, and it would have sunk without a trace. But then Bal Thackeray announced that they were going to launch an agitation asking for a ban on the book. That much has not changed. In India, these things still happen. So, except the government does it now, asking for bans on movies and stuff like that. But anyhow, so the book then became a huge matter of public concern. People wondered what it was, and they asked the Shishthana, the book is very laudatory about Bombay, what are you objecting to? And they said, well, there's a picture of two guys sleeping next to each other. They are, I quote, homos. So people pointed out that even then it was not right to talk like this, and even if they were, what was wrong with it? And besides, they were just people sleeping nearby because Bombay was a very crowded city. So when this didn't work, they thought of some other excuse. So it went on, and I was having dinner with Bal Thackeray, and he asked me about the book, and I told him that it was a pretty bad book, but I thought he'd made it a bestseller by trying to have it banned. What did he object to in the book? It was fine. So he kept very quiet. He looked down at this disgusting liver curry that he used to always have, and then he looked up at me and he said, "Do you think I'm short?" So he was my height. So I said, "No, of course not. You're not at all short." And then he stopped and his face contorted with rage, and he said, "Why this bloody Murray says I'm short?" So that is what the book was. That is what the ban was about. He'd been called short. Don, who'd never met him, went with the standard sort of, he's a fascist, he must be a small, inadequate man who's doing this to compensate. In fact, Bal Thackeray wasn't particularly short.
But I love that story, and I want to ask you about this power that journalism held at some point of time, right? You talk about you did the first food review. And you went to the Oberoi, right?
The first negative review. To be fair, there were people like Bayram contractor before me who wrote very well.
Yeah, I mean,
and imagined we were I was the only guy who went to a restaurant and said, "This is crap, don't go."
I'm sorry, that's what I meant. Negative food review. Let's say this. So, and things changed. You said they say after even this story, right? Journalists had the power to make a difference in a way.
I'm not so sure about restaurants. People keep saying to me that if you give a restaurant a bad review, it'll make a difference. I think it makes a difference the ego of the chef, because there are many, many bad restaurants in India, and no matter what you write about them, they flourish. So I don't think journalists actually have the power to do that. But we like to think we do.
No, but maybe Zomato now with bad reviews, I suppose.
Makes no difference. In fact, it's actually got worse, because what's happened now is that because of social media, where everyone's a critic, it's become, every restaurateur will tell you this, people will walk in and will say, "I'm posting a review on social media, I don't like this, I don't like this." And the restaurateur will say, "I'm very sorry, can I replace it?" He'll say, "Yeah, okay, but I want the meal free, otherwise just read my review on social media." That happens a lot.
So it's become, you think it's like become, Okay.
They probably have more power than we have official critics do.
Okay, so maybe this thing, but there was a point of time when journalism and journalists...
It mattered,
It mattered, right? But do you think that it is this, is it only about regime, or do you think it even before that with social media, do you think that, or even this thing, do you think that journalists and journalism don't have the ability to sort of I'm not saying bring down governments, make the change that we used to? Do you think that...
Yeah, I think that's right. I think this government doesn't really care what the media say, and the media will not say anything beyond a point, because let's face it, people are too frightened to say anything very critical. So this government has worked out that if you sit tight and there are a few bad articles and you do nothing, or set the IT cell on the people who are doing the articles, which happens a lot. Journalists get trolled and abused personally if they write anything that's critical of the government, in the hope of intimidating them. That if they do nothing, the mood will change and people will forget what journalists have said. And sadly, it's true. Nobody cares.
But do you think it's only this government, or do you think also, if you look at it internationally in terms of journalism itself, there is, look at New York Times with Trump, look at this thing, it doesn't matter necessarily where we're sort of raging, and the world has changed so much, it's become more polarized. Do we really have the power to make people think? Do we have
I don't know enough about the global scene, but do you think Boris Johnson would have been forced to resign if the British press hadn't gone on and on about what he did?
Yeah, but it was also, it's also economics, right? And with Boris...
No, Liz Truss,
but
stupidest woman ever to become prime minister and screwed economy. But in the case of Boris Johnson, it was his personal life and the fact that he acted as the rules didn't matter. So I think it matters abroad. I think it doesn't matter in India.
Okay. But let's talk about the time when it did matter. Let's talk about the time when we could sort of dream, and let's go back to a time when, older times when, so you were the first...
Not that long ago, it was like 8-9 years ago when it didn't matter. If you look at the Manmohan Singh government, if you look at the UPA Part 2 was destroyed by the media, by press and television, which ran stories day after day, night after night about the scams that had happened. Many of the scams turned out not to be scams. In the case of the 2G scam, they arrested various people. This government took over the prosecution.
But
the judge said, "I'm acquitting all of you because the government has produced no evidence." So nobody really cared what the truth was. The media just went on and on about the government. They destroyed Manmohan Singh's government.
But is it... Okay, so I agree. I mean, I think there is certainly the power of media at that point of time. But I'm saying that it's not only. I mean, I'm talking about a time even before that when access. I mean, by the time UPA 2 came in, there was all the other aspects of print journalists, where print journalists were sort of getting back into being not irrelevant, but we certainly were going back into the back. We were taking a back stage. I can you see. I'm talking about I'm talking about the time of your book when you were at the height of journalism, where journalists and when magazines were just being taken out, when newspapers were just taking out, when the emergency, all those things. Post that, there is where journalism was at its height.
Yeah, I mean, even for a second level politician or even a first level politician to be on the cover of, say, India Today was a really big deal.
Was a really big deal, right?
Now I don't think they notice.
Yeah, I mean, you have I'm talking about the point of time where you could have, when you had Zelsing and Rajiv Gandhi, and you get the first interview of Rajiv Gandhi, and you have Zelsing, and you sort of go back and get him to give you a response.
Yeah.
And they do. I'm talking about the point of time where you do have this thing. So I'm not talking about the UP. Right?
But that still happens. I mean, Zelsing was, some of you were old enough to remember, well, Gyani Zelsing was President of India. He was appointed by Indira Gandhi. And when he was appointed by Indira Gandhi, as a measure of the quality of the man, he said, if my leader had asked me to do a jhadu, I would have done a jhadu. For me, the presidency is no different. So he then got into Rashtrapati Bhavan. His Prime Minister, because Mr. Gandhi died shortly afterwards, was Rajiv Gandhi, who took the line that Zelsing was a loathsome character, which he may or may not have been, but he was President of India, and I think it was incumbent on Rajiv to accept that and to respect the position, which Rajiv did not. So Rajiv kept ignoring him on various issues, and Zelsing then fought a campaign against Rajiv by leaking stories to the media. I was editor of a Bombay magazine called Imprint, which I think nobody in Delhi had heard of, but he gave me an interview. Again, traditional convention, you had to say friends of the president rather than president, but tearing into all the things that Rajiv Gandhi had done to him. I was introduced to Rajiv Gandhi shortly after that for the first time, and again, off the record, he rebutted every one of those allegations. We ran the stories side by side, and as Mandira is saying, that would never happen today. Nobody would bother to tell a journalist what was really happening.
Yeah. And also, I don't think, I think there was a certain level of openness. There was a certain level of willing to talk to journalists. And which is why I think it's such a fascinating thing. I mean, you said...
But also, I mean, that's important, though. Zelsing didn't think I was on his side. And Rajiv knew I'd done a cover story saying he was treating Zelsing badly, but he still spoke to me. There wasn't that sense of these are our people and the rest are anti-national, which is what we have to do.
Yes, I think there was a certain respectability. I think also, and how much of that is also because of, journalism itself. Do you think we're self-reflective enough?
I don't know. I mean, I remember during the emergency, when Mrs. Gandhi first imposed press censorship, arrested Kuldeep Nayar, who was the leading journalist of his day, and then decided she didn't need to. As long as she frightened people, they would self-censor, which is what happened. LK Advani, after Mrs. Gandhi lost the election, and when he was INB minister, said that when all of you were asked to bend, you crawled.
Yeah.
I mean, he was ahead of his time. He was talking about today.
Yeah. Really? Yeah. So, okay. I think we've done enough self-reflection for journalism for a while. I'm possibly the only two people who've done it right now. So I think maybe let me tell you all the chat-pata bits of this thing. Can you tell us all about the incident about Sonia Gandhi and Bob Geldof?
Okay, this was at the HT Summit. The Hindustan Times has a summit every year, and there's a dinner, and there are many eminent speakers who come from abroad for large sums of money, but they turn up, and there's Indian leaders who come for nothing, or at least fewer of them do now, but in the old days, Sonia Gandhi would come every year, and we would grill her, and we would have a dinner on that day, and this was at the HT dinner. Bob had arrived, Bob Geldof, who I knew a bit from his last visit to India, and Sonia, who I knew a bit from interacting with her, and we found ourselves on the same table at dinner, and Bob knew who Sonia was. Sonia didn't know who Bob was, and Bob to everybody's horror, began the conversation by saying to Sonia, "Hey Sonia, what you stuffing your face with?" So she looked up and made some polite noise about biryani. And so he said, "You're Italian, right? Which part of Italy do you come from?" So which is something we know, but Indians were generally in those days did not talk about it. And she said where she came from. And there were similar questions asked by Bob with colorful language, which is Bob's way of doing things. And Sonia answered it all quite politely. And then she turned to me and said in an urgent whisper, "Ye aadmi kaun hai?" So who is this man? So I had to say, and she said, yes, of course, I'd heard of Bob Geldof, but she'd heard of him, of course, in the Live Aid context. I had no idea he was like this. But to her credit, I mean, Bob's conversation is liberally peppered with F words, pronounced in an Irish way, etc. But she sat there and she conversed with him throughout.
Yeah, see?
Yeah.
So I also wanted to tell you, I wanted to ask you about your, you keep bringing up Amitabh Bachchan, for example. You have
two chapters.
Two chapters. Keep bringing up
two chapters.
No chapter, but I like Amitabh Bachchan. So I mean, okay, I'm not sorry, I said this. I like that you have had to be able, you managed to interview Amitabh Bachchan twice at a point of time when, and he gave you access. You also bring him to, he also comes to Telegraph office where, yes, right? So you have had interaction with Amitabh Bachchan.
I had very detailed interaction.
Detailed,
but it's not all in the book.
No, it's not. Okay, so what is not in the book?
Well, I met him first when, 1980-81? He'd banned the press, he'd banned Stardust and everybody, and India Today wanted to do a film story, and I said, you have to get Amitabh Bachchan to give an interview, and they said he never would. So we went and spoke to him, used people who knew him, and he gave us the interview, and he said, how do you want to do it? So I said, that's not how I'll do it. I'll spend a week to 10 days with you. I'll come to the sets in the morning and stay with you till you leave, maybe come to your house for a couple of hours on a Sunday and see how you live, and then write a proper cover story. I was a lot more conscientious then than I became later. So I did this. I would get up at 6 in the morning, take a train, go to the studios, see him at 8 in the morning when he was due for the schedule. And I spent time with him in jail. I interviewed his parents. So I got to know him fairly well during that period. Then I met him again at length after he entered politics, when he was under attack from VP Singh. And then I really got to know him when he was at his lowest ebb, when he'd been forced to resign from Parliament. All his movies were flopping. People said he was involved in Bofors, that he was a crook. I saw him quite closely then. And then I saw him again when ABCL, the AB Corporation had gone bankrupt. He owed 200 crores to banks. They had attached his house. And I found about him that he's a very private man. He doesn't really talk to people, doesn't say anything. But he's also a very vulnerable man. And maybe because I saw him when he was really down and out, I sort of related to his vulnerability. And I thought, in some ways, this cut through the star stuff and we got to the real man.
Yeah, you have this, you talk about at point of time when he's really quiet and he comes out onto set, and you said he does this when he's
on the sets of a Hindi movie called Lawaris, which some of you may remember. He was shooting for a song sequence, and I mean, some of you may know Amitabh Bachchan, to go to meet Amitabh Bachchan, to chat to him, and then to sit for 2 hours and nobody says anything, but the silence is companionable, is not unusual with Amitabh Bachchan. So we were sitting in the set, and we had like an hour, during which I think I read a book and he looked at the magazine, and neither of us said anything to. And then he went out into the sets, and the spot boy came to call him, and he said, "Hey," and he hit him on the shoulder. Then he went out and he said to the cameraman, "How will you take my shot?" And just went through everybody, slapping them on the shoulder, cracking jokes. Did the shot, came back. We sat in the dressing room, and I think he's cheered up, he'll talk to me. He went back to reading his magazine. He didn't say anything for another half an hour. So I said to him, explain this to me. I understand you're a silent person, but what happens to you when you go on the set? Thinking he would say that cinema really matters. He said, no, that's the real acting. I pretend to be this person, and went back to reading his magazine. All right, 4 if you want it.
Well,
what? Okay, all right, for Amitabh, yeah. No, but he is a remarkable man, because the important thing about all of these phases when I knew him was everybody wrote him off. but he always came back. I remember when he was bankrupt and they detached his houses, I launched a new show on Star Plus called, Star Plus it was, called Star Talk. And I said I'll begin it with an interview with Amitabh Bachchan, and everybody, the head of Star and the guy called Ratikant Basu, he said, he's finished, why are you doing this? And I said, no, I think he's interesting. He really talked at length about how he'd been misled, the mistakes he'd made, what it felt like to be bankrupt, to have creditors calling up every day. Really a vulnerable interview, and we telecast it, and my wife Seema and I went out for dinner because I said, I don't know what the reaction is going to be like. I'm not going to watch it. I don't like watching my own shows anyhow. And the phone rang, and it was Amita Malik, who was then the most feared television critic in India. And she said, I saw your interview, sir. I said, yes. Why are you wasting your time on this man? So I said, he's Amitabh Bachchan. He's finished. Nobody cares about him. He is such a bore. You wait and see. I'm told he's in bad health. He will die soon. Well, we are now 20 years later. Amitabh Bachchan is the top, and Amita Malik is dead. So,
So, you in your career, you've talked to politicians, you've talked to, dodgy smuggler types.
To the extent that there's a difference between the two, yeah.
Oh yes, there is. Or maybe no, well, now gold smuggling, well, not now particularly, but smuggling camel soap would sort of be almost naively sweet, right?
It was quite harmless, wasn't
yes,
it?
yeah, it wasn't such a big deal.
Yeah.
But and you've done this whole thing. There was an aspect of, and I wanted to ask you that, the silo that journalists have divided themselves with.
Yeah.
This aspect of the political journalist, the features journalist, and things like that. So do you think, in some ways, the journalists are dinosaurs? Yeah.
I got into journalism working for India Today, and I was a Bombay correspondent. I started before I went up to university, and then I would come back to India during my holidays and write for them. And I was starting out, so I took whatever was available. It was a story on the convention that founded the BJP, I did it. It was a story on Parveen Babi, who was then an actress, I did it. A story on the textile industry, I did it. So I was very clear that I was interested in journalism, not in politics, not in films. It was just a job, and I prided myself on being a generalist, which worked in the context of a news magazine, because you could have Amitabh Bachchan on the cover one week and Indira Gandhi or the next week or whatever. But that's no longer true. I mean, feature journalism is dead.
Yes.
Journalists generally do political reporting.
And those are the only journalists who
The only journalists who are respected.
Yeah.
And unless they're sort of committed journalists who go and take dictation, nobody in politics bothers to tell them anything. So you've never actually had as poorly informed journalism as you do in India now. I'll give you an instance. Whenever there's a reshuffle, every newspaper everywhere in the world speculates who's going to become a minister, who's going to be dropped. We do this in India under Modi, but not once has any journalist got the reshuffle right.
Yeah.
Because this government doesn't talk to people, it's very closed, and nobody seems to understand how their mind works.
And do you think there is any way that, apart from access, do you think in this space, what do journalists do? In a space where access is maybe not easy, or in this space, how do we function, how do we sort of stay relevant?
It's difficult. I don't have any solutions, but it's very difficult because often, like the Vice President, Jagdeep Dhankar, I read the lists of people who are going to become Vice President. Not one mentioned Dhankar. Till the day they announced that he would be the candidate for Vice President. It's not just because people don't confide in politicians, it's also because we don't see politicians up close to understand how their minds work or what they're thinking. If you say know Amit Shah very well, you can probably guess what he's going to do in a given situation. But nobody does. Nobody knows Mr. Modi particularly well. Where the average political journalist in Delhi is as well or badly informed as a member of this audience. Nobody knows anything.
Well, dire times. Can I open it up for the audience who does know almost as much as us?
More perhaps.
More perhaps, right. The gentleman should, okay, so the lady who likes Amitabh Bachchan.
Yeah.
Did he ever mention Rekha?
Who?
Okay, hi. My name is Rekha.
There.
Let me not hide my identity any longer.
All right.
Here I am, and you You are the jury. Go on, do what you want. I'll just stand at the Katehra in that Bollywood movie. Wo bandh ke na. No, I don't really have anything much to say, but I would like to say that it was absolutely beautiful talking to you, and sorry, listening to
I get
You can buy his book. He's signing it. You can talk to him too.
Okay.
yeah, great. I'm sure it'll be very, very, very informative, very up to the expectations.
Thank you.
You're welcome, and always more than welcome. I'm just happy to be here, and I
Thank you.
just like to say that keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
The gentleman in yellow.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi, Mr. Sanghvi. The question I have is, in the discourse you spoke about journalism and the present government not giving access.
Yeah.
Is that access? Is it that the government is not giving access, or is that the level of journalism has really gone down, with the Ambanis and the Adanis really owning up half of the journalistic world?
No, if you look at the journalists that the Ambanis have hired and the television channels, they're not bad journalists. So I don't think it's necessarily a decline in the quality of journalism. It's just an unwillingness on the part of the government to let any journalist come close. If you ask a minister for an interview at the moment, the minister can either say yes or no in most situations. Not in this government. It has to be referred up to the PMO or somebody at the head of the party. They will look at the identity and sympathies of the man doing the interview, the woman doing the interview, and will say she's one of us, she's not. Then when the interview is given, they will say, what are you going to ask me? Then they will say, all right, but I will only answer these questions. And then once the interview is out, you're through the door. It's not just with the Prime Minister, it's with most ministers. So you never really have a chance to find out what the guy is like, what does he think, what are his views on issues, because the questions will have gone to him in advance, and the answers he will give you will be bland to the point of boredom.
The lady next to the gentleman, is that okay? And yes.
Sir, I'm not going to ask you about journalism because I think we covered that in quite a bit of detail. But I wanted to ask you about food. So what has your journey with food been like, and how did you get into this in the first place, and how did you expand your career into food?
Well, I like food, which is how I got into it, and I've expanded my waistline much more than I've expanded my career, as you can see. But no, I got into food initially, Bombay Magazine, we talked about that, because there was nobody doing it. And then when I was editor of the Hindustan Times, we were relaunching the Sunday supplement, and we needed a columnist. And I said, get somebody opinionated who eats at these restaurants anyhow. And I said, I used the British parallel, I said, not quite Michael Winner-esque, but somebody like that who isn't a normal food journalist. And they tried very hard to find somebody, and they couldn't. And then they said, will you do it under a pseudonym for the first few months? And I tried to be as Michael Winner-esque as possible into this very opinionated column, but then it didn't come easily, so I just went back to being myself, and the column took off. So I was right that there was a demand for that kind of writing, and then people found out I was doing it. I had to abandon the pseudonym, and then it was just, I guess, why fix something if it isn't broke? So I've kept doing it. But it's really accidental rather than any great decision to take my career in a different direction.
Okay. The gentleman in front, and then the lady in the pink scarf. The gentleman in front with who stood up.
Hello, hi. It was a very good session. I
Thank you.
enjoyed it. I just had two points to make.
Yeah.
Don't you think that you are being a little too critical about this government? Because we have been in India and I have taken birth here. And thing is that even during the Congress government also, I did not see any interview of Manmohan Singh being taken by Arnab Goswami, or for that matter anyone they used to preempt as anti-Congress at that time. And secondly, this government is being very communicative in the sense that we see Man Ki Baat, we see all these interactions happening, and they also give interviews to their pet journalists, like it was the case with Congress. They used to also give interviews to their pet journalists. Maybe their idea is now that those pet journalists like Mr. Rajdeep or some other people, they are not on the, going to agree with them or going to write good about them. So maybe that was the reason.
On the subject of Arnab Goswami and the fact that he was not given interviews, he was given the first interview by Rahul Gandhi. So that's not true. They did give interviews to people who were critical of them. Yeah. So that takes care of that one. The other is Man Ki Baat is essentially the Prime Minister making a speech on television. It's not an interactive thing. You can't ask him questions. Manmohan Singh at the end of every foreign trip would hold a press conference. He also held press conferences which were not on aeroplanes, and I've attended the press conferences unless your position is it was a 3D hologram. So, I mean, he did take questions. They were hostile, and ultimately his handling of the press destroyed him. So to argue that this government is vocal and is communicating is reasonable. There is Man Ki Baat, there are various things, there's the IT cell. You're entitled to that as an opinion. But to say that it's communicating as much as the last government is not correct.
I'd like to ask, there is this subtext in society, there is this undercurrent of discourse that journalists are under threat. And also that media houses suppress independent journalism today. Is that correct?
I think media houses are less interested in independent journalism or journalism that is critical of the powerful than before. That is correct. That journalists are under threat, well, honestly, journalists have been under threat for a long time. It isn't, I read a story in the 1980s for the Illustrated Weekly about that. If it wasn't the center, state governments have attacked journalists. Journalists have been killed in India. So journalism in India has always been a high-risk profession.
But do you think that the public discourse today is being fashioned and fed to us?
It isn't being fashioned or fed, that may be an overstatement, but I think it is true to say that this government is being questioned much less than would be normal. Yeah?
Thank you.
The lady right at the back in blue. That's you, ma'am.
Very good evening.
Hi.
This is about another book that you've written, which has such delightful recipes and gastronomic tips in it, but you call it rude food. Why? And my second question is, being an Indian and a Fauji wife, I've been traveling, well, whenever I travel abroad, the kind of, people look up at Indians, and the kind of honor and this thing we get now is unbelievable. I'm a very, very happy person. Yeah, in the last couple of years, we are holding our head up high.
Really?
Thank you.
In which countries?
In England, in US, in wherever I've traveled, in Germany, my children live there.
And earlier you felt this wasn't true?
It wasn't to this extent, definitely. So that's my personal feeling about it.
That's good, right? You should all be happy about that.
Yes.
Yes, so I'm happy about that too. Yeah. And the road food thing is just a stupid thing because, as I said, we were doing the column temporarily. This seemed like a catchy title, and now I'm stuck with the bloody thing. Even my book is called A Rude Life at the urging of the publisher. So no, there's no deep significance to it. Nice.
I think we've wrapped up. If you want to ask any more questions, please buy a book, and Mr. Sanghvi is signing.
Am I?
Are you not?
I don't think so.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, you are not?
I don't think so. Am I signing? No, I'm not signing.
No, I'm not.
I mean, he would be happy to sign, and we would also encourage you to buy and have him sign.
But there's no organized signing, right?
Yeah, and because he has another appointment within 15 minutes. That's fine.
I don't think it's
But otherwise, we're very happy.
Where?
If somebody is with a book right here.
Sorry, if there are books at the bookstore, he will be there. If you want to buy a book and get him to sign, please be there. Leave now before he gets off the stage. So that it is there, right?
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for having us. And thank you.